So, welcome to this slightly different episode of My Macular and Me. I'm Emma Malcolm and I'm the Director of Services here at the Macular Society. Today, we're joined by Cathy Yelf, who until last week was our CEO and had been for the last 10 years. And she's joined by friends of the Macular Society, Peter White of BBC Radio 4's You and Yours and In Touch fame, and consultant ophthalmologist Ian Pearce, who hosted one of our most watched episodes to date. They will be talking about the past, present and future of macular research. So I'm going to hand you over now to Peter.
Well, that was quick. Thank you, Emma. I think we were going to go on for at least 10 minutes. Anyway, hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to what is, I suppose, both a happy and a sad occasion, really. Happy because we're here to celebrate Cathy's huge contribution to the Macular Society, first as its head of external affairs and for the past decade as chief executive, of course, but sad because she's going. And I know from attending several of your meetings and talking personally to many of the members and having them on In Touch, how warmly members feel about your contribution, Cathy, sorry if you're blushing, to the Macular Society. Not just on the public stage, where you've fought for it, challenged politicians, administrators, tirelessly publicised its work and its significance, but also on a personal level with her warmth and her obvious commitment. Now, if you're wondering what I'm doing here, invading your organisation and your regular webinars, well, I was very flattered to be asked to introduce this farewell tribute to Cathy, and I was delighted to do so. And I really mean that. Just a little detour before we get to the real business of talking to Cathy, because Cathy and I knew each other before her coming to the Macular Society. She was also a broadcaster and indeed produced a mid-morning programme we used to do on the local radio station in Southampton. I don't know if you remember, Cathy, on one occasion I'd come back from somewhere and had jet lag and you had to wake me up during the, I think it was a very long phone call from somebody, and you just yelled, "Wake up, I know she's boring, but wake up." So that was the kind of producer Cathy was. She produced it, I may say, with the same energy and firmness and with an equal outspokenness that she's applied on behalf of the Macular Society, if she feels something isn't being done the way it ought to be done. There will be a chance in the programme, probably mainly in the second half of this hour, but any time that Emma feels like interrupting me, for members to put their questions to Cathy. So make the most of it, because this is the last time, at least as Cathy is CEO. But let's get to our guest of honour, Cathy Yelf. And first of all, knowing you as I do, because beneath all your firmness, I think you're quite modest in a way, and you probably think this is all a little bit embarrassing. Am I right about that?
Yep. Yes, you are. I have to say, it wasn't my idea. I mean, it's lovely, and I'm delighted to be here. But yes. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll try to not to make it too embarrassing. I don't know how many members know this story, but given that as I said, you were a broadcaster and journalist, how did you find your way to the Macular Society?
Yeah, it's a long time ago now, isn't it? I worked at the BBC as a freelancer and on the staff for many years. I'm probably more than 25 years, probably. I spent with the BBC, and it's a fantastic place to work. It really is. It's very odd. It's quite an eccentric place to work, but it is wonderful, and you work with some amazing, talented and incredibly creative people. So I had a lovely time at the BBC. But I got into sort of middle age and thought, well, can I do this forever? Daily news and current affairs is quite hard work, let me tell you. And I thought, I don't know, I quite like to do something else. Because as a journalist, you're an observer, aren't you? You're watching life unfolding. And fascinating and interesting and stimulating though it is, you're not actually doing much yourself. So I thought, well, I'd quite like to do something actually before I get to past it. So I thought, well, I'll leave the BBC. I've had a great time, but I need to go and do something instead of just watching other people do things. And I was talking to a dear friend and neighbour in the village where we live, who happened to be the then chief executive of the Macular Society. And he said, well, what are you going to do, Cathy? What are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't know, Tom. I think I'd quite like to work for a charity. This is Tom Bremridge. Some of you will remember Tom Bremridge, a dear friend still. And he said, well, I've got a charity. What do you think about working for us? And I thought I could do a little bit of comms, like 2 days a week or something, sort of semi-retirement. So that was how it I was interviewed by Gwyn and the then treasurer Tom, and they offered me a job 2 days a week working in the. And I was called the head of external relations, which makes it sound like there was a deputy head of external relations or a department of external relations. There wasn't.
It was just you, was it?
Yeah. It was me and a lovely freelance PR person called Amanda. So that was how it happened, because I happened to know Tom Bremridge, lovely Tom Bremridge, and he lured me into the society 16 years ago.
So just explain the situation you found when you got there, because when you took over you were the one member of that department in 2008. There was quite a lot of controversy going on, wasn't there? There was it was about which drugs should be used. There were issues about the cost of those drugs, about health authorities wanting to use a cheaper drug, Avastin, about the arguments that it hadn't been intended for eye treatment. There was all sorts of stuff, and you came in at a pretty important and quite controversial moment.
It was incredibly important. So the first licensed drug for wet macular degeneration, Lucentis, had just been approved. It hadn't been rolled out in all areas of the country, and that was a huge part of the first bit of work, was to put pressure on I think they were called primary care trusts at the time.
They keep changing their name, don't they?
Don't they? To implement the NICE appraisal findings, and that in itself had been a huge controversy, because the initial recommendation had been only to treat the second or the better seeing eye. And this caused huge grief, really, because it meant effectively people would have to go blind in one eye before they were treated in the second eye. And everybody felt this was unacceptable. And our members, through Tom, galvanized them to write to NICE and complain about this. And I think to date, it is still the biggest public response to a NICE draft recommendation that's ever happened. And they did indeed change their minds, but it was slow to be implemented, and we had to work really hard to make sure that every part of the country did so. And eventually, I eventually spoke to some people who I knew on the Panorama program, the BBC Panorama program, and they did a program about it. And there was one very important part of the country that changed its policy the next day. They didn't even wait for the next board meeting. They changed, so you could still have some influence over that. Dreadful way to make health policy, depending on what's on the Panorama program. But it did work, and we had to do a lot of PR work to shame parts of the country, really, into saying you must implement that. The law says you must implement what NICE says. Do it.
Yeah. I remember we did it quite often on the programme. I'm going to bring in our other guest in a minute to talk about that, but I just want to put one more, because this is your party. So I'm going to put one more question to you. The Society's founder, Elizabeth Thomas, she always thought, I think, that it was a bit of a Cinderella area of eye care, let alone healthcare, going under the radar. Didn't she? And the question, do you think that's still the case, or have you rattled enough cages to make sure it isn't?
I think it is still the case. It doesn't, you don't die from losing your vision mostly. Macular degeneration doesn't even hurt physically. It's not like teeth even. Your teeth hurt, and I feel it always gets put into everybody's miscellaneous pot. You deal with the heart disease, cardiovascular disease, you deal with the cancers, you deal with the dementias, you deal with the musculoskeletal problems, you deal now with antimicrobial resistance, and then you have sort of everything else in a big pot for everything else, and that's where it goes. Just before COVID, people started to notice in government that ophthalmology had become the biggest outpatient specialty in the NHS, bigger than anything, bigger than orthopedics, bigger than everything. And somebody went, oh my goodness me, this is really a big public health issue. And then, of course, we had COVID, and again, it sort of slipped down the pecking order again. So we do need to, because time after time, people look all the research, everybody says they fear losing their sight more than they fear almost anything else. Even cancer, even serious conditions like diabetes, losing a limb. People fear sight loss more than all of those things. Survey after survey tells us this. And of course, because of the most eye disease is affecting older people, and older people are becoming a very, 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 very significant part of the population now. It cannot be ignored any longer. It really does have to. And I think in truth it is. We do have now Louisa Wickham, a national clinical director for eye health, who is now looking around to see how can we reform the system, the eye care system, to cope with the number of people who are going to need treatment for eye disease now and in the future. So there are promising signs, I think.
Well, I think we'll come back to that issue of the idea of a better strategy, a better overall way of doing this. But I want to introduce our other guests because we also have with us tonight, and are very grateful to him for joining, is Professor Ian Pearce, who's a consultant ophthalmologist at the St Paul's Eye Unit in Liverpool's Royal University Hospital. So very much at the sharp end of dealing with the whole issue, with the medication and the various forms of age-related macular degeneration treatment. So Ian Pearce, Professor Pearce, thank you very much for coming on.
I'm delighted, Peter.
Well, that it's great. And of course, you've already quite recently talked about dry AMD, which is the stubborn one,
Yeah.
the one that won't get sorted. But before that, can I just ask you what you think the role of users group like the Macular Society is? Because after all, the Macular Society is one of the biggest of the group. It may be the biggest, I think, and I think has grown under Cathy's leadership. Partly, I guess, because of the growth of numbers of people in the age bracket most likely to get it, and we're going to go on seeing that, but also because Cathy's worked at making it better known and widening its role. So, what do you think support groups like the Macular Society do?
It speaks truth to power. I mean, that's what it does, and I'm sure that's where your background in journalism, as Cathy, has brought that strength to it. As a patient advocacy group, it is so important. We all have our individual patients and cases that we can try and tell the payers, whether it be the primary care trusts or the integrated care boards as they are now. But having a patient advocacy group at a national level brings the voices together as a single voice. You pass on. The Macular Society works endlessly. I mean, we know you mentioned about the numbers of patients with macular degeneration. There's 100 patients today who have developed wet macular degeneration, and many of those patients will call the Macular Society looking for support, looking for advice, pointing them in the right direction. So that's one area of helping the patients. But the other area at the other end of the spectrum is helping us as physicians speak to the payers and the government and say, look, we really do need this. This is affecting patients on a daily basis. And here's the evidence, here's the cost effectiveness, but here's also the voice of patients, how it's affecting them and how we can make a difference to them. And the Macular Society in the UK, led by Cathy over the last decade, is one of the examples throughout the world of how to do it rightly. I've been chairing a meeting today, an international meeting, and we were asking around the table about patient advocacy groups. And, they're dotted. Australia have a very big patient advocacy group. Canada are starting to develop one. But Spain and many countries in Europe do not have a collective voice that we have in the UK. We're very fortunate to have the Macular Society. We're very fortunate to have had Cathy leading it. And as you say, Peter, promoting it and building it. And it's, that's the reason why I've, been joined this evening to really pay my tribute to Cathy. I think you've been a fantastic voice for patients, but you've been a fantastic help for us at trying to provide these treatments to patients and to try to give patients a direction, because it's not easy. as a physicians. It's not easy for patients, but you're helping to bring that together, and we're eternally grateful. And I think you've left a legacy that will hopefully continue to grow and speak, as I say, truth to power for us, and make sure that we can provide these treatments.
And I just want to put one other point to you before I go back to Cathy, because it's not just speaking truth to power that it does, but it gives a lot of information as well. So dealing with an eye condition isn't just about treatment. I mean, obviously people want to get better, and that is quite a hard thing to achieve with this, but also the more you know, the better you're able to deal with it. And a key factor, and this certainly applies to eyes, is getting the information you need as soon as possible, you know, when you need it. I mean, for instance, information about getting yourself registered as visually impaired, if that is appropriate for you, not least because there are benefits that go with it, some huge benefits. Is that getting better, do you think? Because I want to ask you this before I ask Cathy, because we still hear on a programme like In Touch about people, you know, who don't get the help they are entitled to because they've not been registered, and that isn't always because they don't want to be. It's because, you know, the paperwork hasn't been done.
No, exactly. I mean, I think that it's providing that equality of care. I mean, that's what NICE was brought in to do, to get rid of postcode prescribing, where in one part of the country you could have this treatment, in another part of the country you could have something different. And so NICE was brought in to try and make sure that everybody had a standard. And that's, so if you're an individual patient in an area, you don't know whether is this what all I'm entitled to? If I lived elsewhere, would I be entitled to it? You can call the Macular Society. You can go on their website. Your family can investigate that for you and find out what is available. And that just then empowers you as a patient to know, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not sure I'm getting it. You know what sixth sense is like. We get a feeling, don't we, that something's not just right, and perhaps there should be something, whether it be supportive care, low visual aids, registering, or whether it be active treatment. You get a sixth sense, but you don't know who to ask. You do now through the Macular Society. They're always there and are very able to ask.
Yeah, I mean, and Cathy, I guess you also see that as an important part of what you do, not just you know, going to the meetings and yelling at people or speaking softly but determinedly to people, or however you do it. But this idea of trying to provide an information service for what could be a very confusing situation.
Yeah, I think so often we hear people who say the first time they'd ever heard of macular disease when they've told they've got it. And I do feel for people in clinics and optometry businesses where they're very pressed, aren't they? We're famously pressed for time, and it is difficult to find the time to sit down and have a really long conversation. People come away as a result confused. And even where they do get good quality information, of course it's after you leave the clinic, isn't it? And I've been in this position myself, where suddenly you think of all these questions.
I should have asked that. Yeah.
That's right. And you can't keep going back to the clinic and having another session, can you, with an ophthalmologist, because there aren't, you know, you can't do that. So where do they go? Who do they phone when they wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, that horrible time in the morning where all the fears crowd in on you and you think, oh, I don't know, you know, where do you go? And I often say to people, eye care professionals who do fantastic jobs, this isn't a criticism, but think, what happens to your patient when they leave your clinic? Where do they go for support and help and information when they leave your clinic or your optometry practice? What happens to them? Where do they go? And it's incredibly important. But you make the other point, Peter, about registration we have very poor data. This is one of the reasons I truly believe why ophthalmology is a bit of a Cinderella service. It's partly because the data that is available, the information, the numbers, we don't know really and truthfully how many people have registrable level sight loss, because it's a voluntary system, as it certainly should be, but so many people fall through the net. We haven't got good epidemiological evidence, data about how many people are affected by macular disease, because the population studies that we use were done 30 years ago. I mean, it's such a paucity of good quality data, and that does make it difficult. I don't know, Ian, whether you agree with me about that. It makes it difficult to make the case for ophthalmology when the data is so patchy, isn't it?
totally agree. I mean, Peter mentioned about dry macular degeneration. When I'm giving a talk on dry macular degeneration, I give a figure of roughly 40,000 patients per year who develop the advanced form of dry macula, but that figure is an estimate based on some data that we have, but we don't know whether that's 15 or 100,000. We believe it's around about 40,000, which, to put it in perspective, is roughly the same amount of patients each year developing wet macula. And so we don't know the real figures. We have an idea, and we know it's a lot of patients, and you know from the calls you receive, and as you say, underreporting that definitely occurs that you're aware of. But it's a large number, as you've referred to. The ophthalmology is the largest outpatient service in the whole of the NHS, and a significant proportion of that is age-related macular degeneration. But you don't only deal with that, you help and support many other patients with lots of types of macular disease and sight loss, and it's just that is a pressing problem that many of us face as we get older. Right. I think that's the thing that strikes home to me about it, is we work all our lives, we're taxed, we work hard, we look forward to a retirement of enjoyment of things we can do, and then the rug is taken away, and it's time to adjust. And people do adjust very well, and surprisingly well in many situations. But the support that the Macular Society provides is immeasurable.
Just to remind people that this isn't your normal sort of typical webinar, but we are very happy, at least I think Cathy and Ian are very happy to accept questions. So if you've got questions, and especially if they're not just telling Cathy how wonderful she is, because we know that, but if there's a question you want to put about the role of the society, about where it should go, you can pinch my questions if you like. I'll not easy about that. So you can get in touch, and Emma is collating the questions, so do join in. I'm just going to switch the emphasis a bit, because I'd like to ask you both this. Improving eye care needs money. I think you both said that, and money needs politicians to understand the problem and authorise it. Starting with you, Cathy, as a former journalist, I think it's fair to say that you're quite keyed into politicians. How hard is it to get them to listen, to accept that amongst all the people that they've got in their ear, yours is the voice they should be listening to? How do you do that, and can you tell when you're doing it?
It's very hard. It is very hard. You can imagine a new government coming in now, how many interest groups there are desperate to get their priority on the to-do list, and so it is incredibly difficult. I do think we've had quite a lot of success in the last 3 or 4 years, and we've done this in partnership with other organisations, because although the Macular Society is obviously an incredibly important organisation, it is a relatively small organisation even now. So we've done this in collaboration. We've had a bit of traction really with politicians, and have succeeded in getting attention for eye health a little bit more. And I think that we've done a lot of interaction with some of key Labour politicians. There is an all-party parliamentary group. There are hundreds of these, and some of them are not very effective at all. And I think the eye health one wasn't very effective for many years. But in fact, we have managed to get a little bit more energy into the all-party parliamentary group for eye health. So I think things are moving forward, and I think that there has been an understanding, because of the size of the problem, because of the amount of activity in the NHS, that we have to find ways of making that more efficient. And yes, money is involved in this, but it's also redesigning the service in such a way that we can cope, the system can cope with the number of people, older people like me, who are going to be needing eye care services in the future. So that definitely has been moved forward. But
we know Keir has spoken to Donald Trump. Has he spoken to Cathy Yelf yet?
No, I'm sure it's next week's priority.
Well, what about Wes Streeting? He's perhaps the next one you want, isn't he?
I mean, in some engagement with Wes Streeting.
Yeah. I mean, you have got a new government that has. I mean, I know that there's a heck of a lot for them to do, as we know. But would you regard this as a new opportunity in a sense?
It has to be a new opportunity, doesn't it? You know, and I think that the trick, I think, for the sector is not on always to go with problems. Go with solutions. Don't, you know, it was Margaret Thatcher, wasn't it, who famously said, "Don't bring me problems, offer some solutions." And we do have some solutions. So our partnership, the Eyes Have It, get the joke, parliamentary partnership, the Eyes Have It, published a foundations report last November, setting out what is required for a good quality eye health strategy. And although it's focused on England, because England is such a big department to try to NHS England to try to corral, it actually is applicable to other parts of the country, because we know there are major problems with waiting lists in parts of Wales and in parts of Northern Ireland. It is not peculiar to England that there are problems. There are good solutions in some of these other places as well, and it's about understanding, you know, what some of those good solutions are. So going with some ideas and ideally quick wins for a Labour government who can do something positive fairly quickly is the aim. And of course we did have the support of the Labour MP Marsha de Cordova just before the election, who chaired the all-party parliamentary group and did in fact put forward a private member's bill for requiring the government to produce a national eye care strategy for England. It fell, as so many private members' bills do, but it did get some support from the Labour benches. So I'm optimistic that we can make some headway.
And Ian, do you see this this business of grappling with politicians, is that part of your role, or do you think that your role is more to understand the condition, understand all the treatments, and there are now quite a few, treat the people who get them? I'm just wondering, because doctors can be quite political, can't they?
Yeah, and I mean, it has to be in a coordinated way, and it has to come, as Cathy says, with solutions. I think one of the things about ophthalmology, the issue is ophthalmology is a speciality within medicine that people don't understand, because it's a very specialized area. So most general practitioners don't understand it. Most other physicians don't have an idea. And so that's why it's sometimes seen as a Cinderella. It's because it's just not seen, because it's in the basement. It just carries on doing all the work. But one of the strengths of it is we're very open to change. And ophthalmology has changed dramatically in the last 10, 15 years. We've gone from having no treatments for macular degeneration to having a wealth of different treatments. We've gone from surgery for cataracts not that long ago, coming in as a patient, staying in hospital, sandbags by the side of your head to keep your head from moving for a couple of days after, to in and out now between the shopping trips. I mean, it literally has, changed dramatically in the space of a few years, really. And so we're open to change in ophthalmology. As Cathy says, though, there are examples of good practice, and that needs to be translated. That translation, I think the will is there, but it needs capital investment at times to get it started. And that's the difficulty we're facing, is where is that capital investment to make that change? We're willing to change as an ophthalmology society, fraternity, to try and help. But there is changes that they don't come without a cost initially, but the savings and the benefit to patients to making their journey, they're getting the more effective treatment in a timely manner. Certainly for ophthalmology, that when we're dealing with macular degeneration, it's not the treatment, it's getting the treatment at an early stage is so critical.
Yeah.
And we just need, to translate good practice into other areas. There's a little bit of support, and we will try and make that case at every opportunity.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is just to kind of stand this up a bit more, because I guess a lot of the people who've joined us, this is what they really want to know. And I know this is what you talk about all the time, but I guess, Cathy, I mean, waiting lists is still a huge problem.
It is. It does vary around the country, and that frustrates me enormously. If you can do it in town X, why can't you do it in town Y? And that does irritate me enormously, not as much as it must irritate the patients, of course, and probably the medical staff as well. And it is sometimes down to physical space. We just haven't got any room to do it. And I think things have got better, but we did hear the other day of some budget cuts in in one clinic, which meant that waiting times are going up. And in another place, we heard of you know, a particular health area being pleased that they'd got their waiting time beyond outside guidance down from 15 weeks to 6 weeks. That's 6 weeks longer than it ought to be. And it does mean every time somebody's delayed, then there's a risk to a little bit more vision that, you know, won't come back when it's gone. And time to treatment, and this hidden waiting list that we've heard a little bit about before the election, where it's not just the time to the first treatment. Of course, for people with, if you go for a cataract, you go for one treatment and then you might have a follow-up treatment and then you're done. But with macular disease, you're going back for retreatment again and again and again. And the waiting list for the retreatments, of course, don't appear in the NHS figures, or you've got to look really hard for them. Nobody's collecting them in a systematic way. There is now a national ophthalmology database, which does have some figures now for wet macular degeneration. They've just published the second set of data on that. So things are getting slightly better. But a lot of this delay is hidden from the system, and it makes it very difficult for people to argue their case. I mean, I have in the past, I have honestly told people to get sharpened elbows. And it's a terrible thing to say when somebody calls very distressed because their appointment has been delayed again and again and again. You have to say, sharpen your elbows and phone up and complain. I know that by saying that, they might be pushing somebody else further down the waiting list if they're successful. But what else can you say? You've got to fight, haven't you, for yourself?
Yeah, that's not my experience, Cathy. I mean, I think you're right. The fear is you displace somebody else, but actually what you actually do is you draw attention to an area. And so actually you very rarely displace somebody further down the list. What you actually do is you push yourself up the list and you bring people with you because you've drawn attention to it. And that actually, we don't always worry too much about getting a letter from the Houses of Parliament, because it tends to bring along the things we've been asking for many years as well. So drawing attention to yourself, your own plight, isn't always at the loss of other people. It's often to the benefit of other people. Now, I don't want that to encourage everybody, but the reality is, I don't think you should fear it on your own. You have to fight for yourself, but you'll have to be fighting for others.
Well, the number was 72, I think, and it's probably increased quite a lot, the number of people who are on. So you've told all of them to do that, Ian and Cathy, between you. So, and they'll tell their friends.
You're up to 108 now, Peter.
It's so 108, right? Well, that's very good. And as I say, I know you have many other opportunities to talk about individual kinds of treatment, and that may be some of the things you want to talk about, and we're happy to accept questions on that. But the main purpose of this evening is to bid a fond farewell to Cathy, which is why I'm going to ask you, what are you most pleased to have done in the, should we say 15 or 10 years? I mean, as chief executive, you're the boss, so you take the blame and you get the credit. But what are you, is there something that you will say at the end of all this? I did that, at least, or I'm really glad that I pushed so that we as an organization did that.
Oh, I think that I think that one thing is that I think the Macular Society is now a recognised experts in macular disease. I think if there's macular disease on the agenda, then we are at the table, and I think that's really important, because we can advocate so strongly and so directly, and with real people to back us up for people affected by macular disease. So I think that has been quite important. I think the another area is that in terms of the research agenda, because we are also a research charity. So yes, we do an awful lot of advice and information and support, and it is critically important that we do. But actually, we know from our members that a lot of people want to be, they don't want to have macular degeneration. And as people understand more about the genetic components of macular disease, many different forms of macular disease, then actually they understand that if there's a family history of this, then other generations are at risk of macular disease as well. And they don't want what has happened to them. Please tell me in the chat whether I'm talking nonsense here. They don't want what has happened to them to happen to their children or their grandchildren and further generations. And so they support medical research. They want medical research to find better treatments and who knows, a cure for macular degeneration. And that is an incredibly important part of our work. So over the last few years, and Emma, who introduced us today, is a critical part of this as well. We have been on a major fundraising investment program to increase our income so that we can fund more research, more services, help more people, but actually fund more research. And we've now got a wonderful director of research in post who is developing some very ambitious plans for the future of our research program, and actually building an infrastructure for the sector and strengthening the infrastructure around macular research in the UK. So that will accelerate. The whole purpose, of course, is to accelerate the progress towards finding better treatments, new treatments, and who knows, one day a cure. There's some fantastic, amazing things that are happening in the scientific area, in the research area, and they will come to fruition, I'm quite sure, in the next few years. And so being part of that has been a very important part of what we've done.
Yeah.
Peter, there's a great question in the chat which leads on quite nicely from that, actually, which is Ramesh wants to know, Cathy, what have you enjoyed most about your time at the Macular Society?
What I've enjoyed most is the people. It's always the people, isn't it? The people who our members, we are so lucky with our members and supporters who are so loyal and so caring and giving and generous to the society. Amazing people that I speak to. Actually, Ian, you commented, touched on earlier that actually with the right kind of support, people cope amazingly with their macular degeneration. And I am astonished at the strength that people show in coping with it and getting on with life. And they've been very, very inspiring. I've worked with some amazing people in the society, but also people like Ian, the eye care professionals who are so dedicated, and the scientists who work to find improved ways of looking after people with macular disease. So it's the people. It's an amazing sector. It really is. It really is. That's what I'll miss.
If I can just say, I mean, you talking about your members, I was lucky enough, you asked me to go and talk to some groups when you were going all around the country. I think the webinar has perhaps taken over a bit from that. There are all sorts of reasons why, we don't travel as much. But what I thought there was how involved they were, because you tended to get, you asked a lot of people to come along like Ian with expertise, and they just asked, your members asked brilliant questions, and just the extent of interaction that I saw, even in the odd days I was there, was I think to a greater extent than I'd seen with, I mean, I go to quite a lot of groups of visually impaired people. There's just something about it that the people had clearly feel open to ask and to give their views, and not just feel as if they're there, the recipients of information. So that's just an impression that I had.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think this is. I mean, I was fortunate enough to inherit that. I haven't created that. That's how I came into the society. It was like that. It's previous. It's previous chief executives, but it's also, there is something about people affected by macular disease. They are. It's a really interesting community, and they've always very, very engaged and very interested and keen to understand and keen to know more about the condition. And so we've always had fantastic attendance at all our events by people who are really truly engaged and interested, but also have a great relationship with the charity. And I come across quite a lot of other charities who are amazed that people, they really quite like you, don't they? Think, well, yeah, they do, shouldn't they?
Well, it is noticeable that, as I say, for fear of embarrassing you, but it is very noticeable that they do they do like you.
The organisation, like you. Quite like the organisation. The loyalty, and through COVID, we did an awful lot of. We started, of course, doing many more online things during COVID, and we had great attendance, and I had amazing feedback. People were people are so loyal to us and so generous, so generous.
Ian, just because what people really want to know, as Cathy referred to a bit earlier, they really want to know what about my kind of macular disease, and what about the treatment that I'm getting, and is this actually going to work? Is this going to do, initially, is it going to stop the decline? Might it slow down the decline, or might it even at some point perhaps restore a bit of vision? Those are the questions you couldn't help asking. You recently did the webinar on a treatment for dry AMD, which has proved until now so stubborn to deal with, but more generally, what do you feel the prospects are at the moment? Are you an optimist? And it's almost unfair to ask you this question, but I'm just wondering how far you think it can go. I mean, I've talked to ophthalmologists who start thinking about AI in the interesting way of not necessarily saying that that's coming up with cures, more that it makes diagnosis so much, it could make diagnosis so much quicker. And what that means, what that does, of course, is gets you to the people who really need the help quicker. Is that an area that you think could be?
Well, most definitely, Peter. I mean, I think there are many areas. I think the root of the question is do I see a future that's brighter than where it is now? And I think yes, definitely. I mean, we're on a wave. We've moved so much in terms of age-related macular degeneration in the last 15 years. It's immeasurable. But we're on the crest of a wave. But I don't know how far that shore is away. I don't know whether we will have get to where we really want to be in the next 5 or 10 years. But what I know, and I'm convinced, is that we're getting there better than we were. We're on that wave, and we're on the crest of the wave for it in terms of the management of wet AMD and how we can get that patients in quicker, earlier, get them timely treated, getting them treated with better treatments, longer duration. We've gone from where patients needed injections every month, to now where many patients, certainly 50% of our patients now, can be once every 3 months. And that's a significant reduction in the impact for patients and a family who may be bringing them to the clinic. Where AI specifically will have its role is in many different areas. It'll help in our decision making. It's just like any other tool we'll use. We use a slit lamp and a OCT scan, but we'll be using AI as another tool to help us work our way through diagnoses, trying to predict the future and give a patient a more accurate prognosis. But also it helps in the early research. If we can identify which are the best things to look for at an earlier stage, it will speed up drug development and treatments that we can bring to patients. So it'll have lots of benefits for us. But one of the things I wanted to finish with really there was that you often hear the burden of disease and how much burden macular degeneration is to the country and the cost that it is. But and I think I speak for many of my colleagues, this is not a burden. This is an opportunity. We feel we're in the best time at being able to help our patients than we were 10, 15 years ago. And do I think the next 10 to 15 years will bring improvements for how we deliver care and how we can improve patients' quality of life? Most definitely. We're on the crest of that wave.
Right. Again, in fact, it's a really appropriate question to put to Cathy, given the evening that it is. I mean, how would you compare where we are now with where you were when you first came into the organisation?
Well, in many ways, we're hugely further forward. The only treatment was for wet macular disease and not everywhere. And then that treatment was spread out to other forms of macular degeneration. So people who had diabetic macular disease, for example, or myopic maculopathy caused by a complication of short-sightedness, into people with other forms of macular disease, and even children treating with conditions like Best disease. during Macular Week a couple of weeks ago, we had featured Matilda in our appeal. Matilda has Best disease, and she has been having injections in one eye since she was 3 years old. And she called them her ouches. That was what she's still having them, and it's preserving the sight in her eye. That would have gone before. And now, of course, we've got, as Ian mentioned, these better treatments, these newer forms of anti-VEGF treatment, the drug which has the action of stopping these new blood vessels growing in the wet forms of the disease, which have extended the amount of time between injections, and that's a huge benefit to patients where that happens. And then we have, coming down the line, you can see how some of the work around gene therapy, for example. So there are some 2, I think, clinical trials now, in late stage clinical trials. This is a gene therapy which the treatment enables the eye to make its own version of the drug, so you wouldn't need so many injections at all. The eye itself, the body itself, will supply this missing element that would stop these drugs. So we are so much closer. So again, these are very, very new therapies, gene therapy, the stem cell therapy, and so on. These are all very, very new, and the regulatory processes can be quite slow, and they need a great deal of care and diligence before they can get anywhere near a human eye, of course. But the progress that has been made is really quite extraordinary. I mean, we do now have, it's not for a macular condition, but there is in fact now a licensed gene therapy for a very rare form of blindness, sight loss, and that was probably thought to be a million miles away 15 years ago.
And that, as you said, that was on one of the genetic conditions, isn't it? Yeah, which I think we featured on the program not that long ago.
But just like the organisation of the health service, research needs investment as well. That also needs investment, and it's a small sector, macular disease research, and it needs investment. It needs ways of encouraging. And in fact, the government have been very good in the last 2 or 3 years since COVID to support early career researchers, so people at the start of their research career, because if they start off very interested in ophthalmic research, very interested in macular research, if it's a very small sector with not enough investment in it, then they may very well, when they get after sort of postdoctoral research level, start to think, well, I've got a family now, I need some regular income and so on. Macular disease, it's will there be the money there for the next stage of this research or not? That's why what we do is so important, and we have had government support over the last 2 or 3 years to help with that. But we have to build the sector to create enough talent and resource in the sector to start to look for these new targets that will bring better treatments in the future.
Ian, were you trying to get in there? I thought
only on terms of that we've really have moved from that example of the gene therapy for this rare inherited disease, but it's moved us from science fiction to science fact, and that is so critical. We have that's happened in your time while you've been here in the Macular Society. The gene transfer therapy has been talked around for as long as I've been a medic. But now it's moved to, this is a fact. And as Cathy says, there are potential now late stage treatments. We believe this idea of producing the drug within your eye may be regulated in the US by 2027 and in Europe and the UK by 2028. 2028 is a couple of Christmases away. It isn't that far away.
You still want to know why Europe has to take a year longer than America, though, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all very well. We talk about the time distances, and but if I had a condition which I thought there was a chance of dealing with it, I'd be really annoyed if it was going to take another year. Yeah. Do you think you said we have to be careful, and do you think these processes could be safely speeded up, Ian?
Well, the simple answer is yes. I mean, we live in a global society. There seems no reason why we would always. I mean, different countries have different demands. There are different incentives in certain healthcare systems and for making sure treatments come available at an early stage. There are perverse incentives that sometimes mean that you want to get them. But in reality,
well, there's care and there's bureaucracy, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge. I think in the UK as a whole, we are relatively good. The MHRA, who now look after the regulation for these drugs and treatments for us, are careful. They've got best interest. NICE, although it gets knocked many times about what it does provide, does a very good job. Most of the drug, well, I don't know of any ophthalmic drug for macular disease that has not got through NICE. NICE has always approved it. It may have approved it with restrictions, and that may well be the case going forward, but it has approved and allowed patients to have treatment. And then if they've restricted it and years later they find that there is evidence to support it in a larger group of patients, they have changed their mind and directed funds to being able to do it. And as Cathy says, it's mandatory. If NICE say you have to provide this treatment, you have to provide it, and it's not good enough for some service. Oh, well, we're still looking at it. No, it's mandatory. It's law, and as Cathy started with, that's what the Macular Society have been reminding people of very effectively, and that's so important.
There's just a couple of things, because we've asked Cathy a couple of tricky questions, like what she most enjoyed and what is she proudest of. So I'm going to ask you another one, Cathy. What would be your message to your successor?
Oh, don't break it. No, he won't break it. I know he won't break it. This is the successor. I guess. I guess to be honest, it's. I am sure, and in fact, I think we might going to meet him in a minute because he's slipped into the room earlier. To be truthful, what I think actually is that he's going to have some brilliant ideas. He's going to have a great strategy, and he's going to go for the next level. That's what I want him to do. Go for the next level. Take us up the next big step. Just keep that trajectory going, and take us up to the next level. Take the whole of the macular profile up to the next level, and do the next stage of the job that needs to be done. Because although we may have done an awful lot in the last 10 or 15 years, and I'm standing on the proverbial giant's shoulders of chief executives in the past, we've come a long way, but there's still a hell of a lot to do, and that's what Ed's got to do next. He's got to go to the next level. So go for it, Ed. Is what I would say.
So should I book him early for In Touch? We do it on air so that we've got witnesses and so forth. Yeah. Well, that's good. But I've got one more quick question for you. So that's your message to your successor, to Ed. What would be your message to your members? Your final message, which this almost is.
The only message really is to thank them. They are an astonishing core of people, and we've come through, it's been a pretty rocky time the last 3 or 4 years. It really has, and I couldn't have, we came through it because of the solidarity of the membership and the support of the volunteers, the amazing volunteers who kept the society going, that kept the show on the road during some really difficult times. The donors and supporters, very many of whom, of course, are also the members and the volunteers. They're the same people in many cases. It was that solidarity and that generosity of spirit, and I'd just like to thank them for that, because it's been an amazing ride. It really has.
And Ian, I mean, you can be, if you got a message, as Cathy's successor is in the building, as it were. What would your message be? Because you obviously, as you've made it very clear, you value the link with organisations like this one. Yeah,
massively. The Macular Society, as I said, it's been a essential part of our development of pushing ophthalmology forward, certainly in the realm of macular degeneration in the UK. And without it, we wouldn't be where we are. There's no doubt of that. I think one of the comments to your successor, for any of those people who are aware of the Hamilton, the musical about Alexander Hamilton, there's a good thing. How does he do it? And the man's non-stop. And that's what Cathy's been over the last decade, is non-stop. You've been at every potential NICE technology appraisal, every opportunity to speak there. You've mentioned recently the Eyes Have It campaign with Parliament. You've been non-stop. And that's what Ed will have to live up to. It is a non-stop job. It won't get any easier in the next 10 years. It'll just be harder and harder, but it's so critical. So just be non-stop would be my suggestion.
So do I do the Hamilton line then? Why does it feel like we're running out of time and we've got 6 minutes left? Had to be done. I'm sorry.
Well,
great show. I loved it.
In case we do run out of time, I would just like to say that Cathy Yelf, who I've known for a long time, I mean, it's always been a pleasure to work with you, both in those old radio days. You used to be known in our house as the girl with the wet hair, and that's because Cathy didn't live that far apart, so she'd come and pick me up in the morning and give me a lift. But I think
I was always late.
You were always late because you were always in a hurry. And my daughter, who was about 5 or 6 at the time, ran to me and said, "Daddy, the girl with the wet hair's arrived," because that meant that I had to get out there quickly because we'd have missed the beginning of the program, which we never did, of course. Anyway, as I say, especially over the past 15 years also, with your always cutting to the chase comments on In Touch, I can only wish you what I'm sure your members wish you, which is a very happy and well-earned retirement. But I gather you're not leaving the field of macular completely, are you? I don't think. You're doing something?
I'm not. So we have this research collaboration called Action Against AMD, which was started by by us, the Macular Society, but it also involves Blind Veterans UK and Sight Scotland and Sight Scotland veterans. And it has a specific job to find a way of stopping early AMD turning into late stage AMD. And the chief executives of the contributing charities sit on the board, but they have asked me to sit on the board as an independent member, so I'm going to do that. So I won't be leaving the sector completely, and it's lovely to still be involved in some small way.
Right. Well, that sounds like a good place to end. I'd like to thank Ian as well, Ian Pearce, for joining us, and just adding a lot of heft to the things that we were saying. Even though
it's been a pleasure and an honour. I'm delighted that I've been able to be involved. Thank you.
Right.
Well, and as Cathy trailed, we are fortunate that Ed Holloway, our new chief exec, has joined us. So Peter, Ian, you guys can also meet Ed alongside everyone that's on the call, so you know who to speak to about what you need in the future.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, you could do a quick preliminary interview if you like, Ed.
Very happy to join you whenever's convenient. And just to say, it's such a huge privilege to be entrusted with the leadership of what's such a wonderful organisation, and really intimidating to be following Cathy, who's clearly done just an outstanding job and has taken the organisation to incredible heights. And I'll certainly do my best to follow your advice and see if I can continue to build on those successes. But thank you.
You will. I know you will. I'm sure you will.
Right, well, that seems fine. Emma, are you going to do a few closing words? We've almost hit the witching hour. Oh, can I just say one thing?
Yes, always.
If you haven't heard enough of Cathy, you can, in 40 minutes' time, you can hear her on In Touch, because we did an interview with her to also mark her early retirement. So anyway, so Emma.
Marvelous. But everybody, thank you so much. I mean, it has been an absolutely wild ride the last 6.5 years working with Cathy, and Ed has a tough act to follow, but we will get even bigger. We will support way more people, and we will fund way more research, because we know we need to beat macular disease. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us and for all your lovely comments about Cathy. We'll be back on the 20th of August, where we'll be talking about home monitoring between appointments for patients with AMD, and we hope you join us then. Thank you everyone for this evening. Bye.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye all.